It's almost Christmas time. This is my favorite time of the year. I'm lucky to say that because I have such pleasant memories about Christmas. I know a lot of people maybe don't, or people don't have as close-knit family as I do, but I'm thankful for that. And it seems like the holidays, Christmas especially, is just the time to enjoy those family ties that run strong in lots of Appalachian families. That's kind of the close-knit family is kind of one of those Appalachian things that's common. Like I said, not everyone, and I sure feel sorry for the people that didn't have it. But for most families in Appalachia, Christmas is a joyous time of the year. Of course, there's their faith. They have that. And a lot of, Appalachia mostly is in the Bible Belt, a good portion of it. So there's a lot of believers. Certainly that's the reason for me and for my family. But no matter, it's just a joyous time of the year for people. And there's around that over the years, there's been so many traditions. Of course, things are different today than they were in days gone by, but a lot of those same traditions are passed down through families, and people still observe them and still do them. Of course, one that comes to mind is pretty much universal, not just in Appalachia, but is food. People associate certain foods with Christmas, and they look forward to the things, the bacon and the pies and the cooking and the whether it's a ham or a deer roast or whatever it is. In my family, the tradition, my husband, Matt, he does, and it was passed down from his grandfather, James, and I'm not sure, we both wish we could go back and ask James, well, did they do that in your family too? Anyway, but it is on Christmas Eve, we fix a pot, Matt fixes it, of oyster stew. And that's what his grandpa always did, and that's what his dad, Papa Tony, that's what he does, and then now that's what we do. It seems odd, I think, well, oysters in Appalachia, but and I thought it was just relegated to his family, but after I become, more interested in the actual research of Appalachia, of history and culture of Appalachia, and started the Blind Pig and the Acorn, I came across several entries from different people, several documentation in books and dictionaries and things, that was a pretty fairly common enough to be documented anyway, that people did eat oyster stew on Christmas Eve. So I was really surprised by that, but that's one of our traditions. A lot of people, you'll hear them talk about making an orange slice cake. If you've never ate that, that's really good. It's like the orange candy, the little sugar-covered candies. That's a really good cake. I make pralines every Christmas. So that's one thing that we look forward to is the pralines. There's fudge. Matt's Uncle Charles, he used to make fudge. He's passed away now, but his fudge, I looked forward to it every Christmas when I would go to Matt's Aunt Wanda's house and eat there. And it's funny, he gave me the recipe for it, and I could never make it like Charles could. It never tasted the same as he did. I had some others wrote down. I was trying to see if I could figure out if I mentioned them all. Oh, sugar cookies, that was the other one. So when I was growing up, Granny always made sugar cookies. That was the only time of the year. And I don't know where she got her recipe, but it's my favorite sugar cookie recipe because it's got orange rind in it. And that little flavor of orange just really makes the cookie special. But anyway, she would cut them out, with cookie cutters, Christmas, Santa Claus and Christmas trees and stars and all that. And then we would decorate them with colored sugar. Well, at some point, I'm sure as kids, we made a big mess and all that. And at some point, she gave up on them and she let me and Paul take over. So there's some funny pictures along the way of my brother Paul and I. My younger brother Steve, he always seemed like an adult. He probably wasn't interested in making cookies. But Paul and I would make them, and that was a lot of fun. And then once I was married, I couldn't wait to start the tradition with my family. So every Christmas, Corey and Katie and I make them. And when they were little, I've got pictures of them making them over the years, being silly like me and Paul were, more of teenage years, but also when they were real little, making a complete mess. Every year I'd wonder, why do I do this? But I'd forget it by the next Christmas, and we'd make the huge mess again with colored sugar everywhere and flour, and letting them try to roll out the cookies and cut them out. It was always an ordeal. I remember one year Corey told me that it made her so happy. She said, Mama, when I grow up, I want to be a cooker. That's what she called it, was a cooker. Anyway, so that's one of the food traditions that we have. And that's common throughout everywhere. Like I said, universal, not just by no means in Appalachia. But there's other traditions that are maybe common in other places too, but I can only speak to Appalachia. But one of them is gathering greenery. So a lot of people, you'll know, they'll go out and they'll shoot mistletoe, which is it's a parasitic plant actually, but it has little berries and it grows in the tops of trees. And the best way to get it out a lot of times is to shoot it out, so because you can't climb that high in a tree, it's in danger. So people will gather mistletoe, they'll gather holly. So holly with red berries in Appalachia is called she holly. The holly, because there's a male and a female of the tree. The one without berries is called he holly. So that's the interesting thing. But people will gather that, and they'll gather just greenery from pine trees, even just white pines, even, but any kind of pine. And also like creeping things that grow along the ground. There's creeping cedar, it's called, there's galax, and there's moss even. And in days gone by, not so much today at all, I don't think. If I'm wrong, tell me if you know more about it than I do. But people actually gathered those things to sell. So they would gather them, people that lived in Appalachia, and they would sell those to florists and to different people that needed them to make arrangements or to sell to other people for their Christmas decorations. And it was like a way to make spending money, make extra Christmas money or extra money for whatever you needed, not just for Christmas, but around the holidays. And one time I'd wrote about galackins, because that was kind of a real industry where people would go out and collect galax leaves. They're like, if you've never seen them, they're about this big, and they're like the shiny green, almost don't even look real, but leaves, and they grow wild throughout the Appalachian Mountains. But one of my blind pig readers left this comment, Ed Ammons. So we never knew about galackin, he said, but we did gather moss and boxwood cuttings to sell to florists. Way back in the woods, in deep, dark, damp hollers where the sun never shines, the thick moss on big rocks can be peeled off like taking covers off a bed. I've seen pieces as big as 4 to 5 feet square. We would roll them up and put them in a tow sack. Boxwood is a domestic plant, so we found it around homes and old house sites. One year in November, we waded across the Little Tennessee above Loudermilk to get to an old homestead. I wasn't being careful about where I was putting my feet and stepped into a hole that put me completely under. I got out, shook off, and kept going. Coming back across, we had to put our tow sacks on our heads to keep them dry, but we made it unscathed. So that was Ed telling about the days when he actually went out and gathered the stuff to sell. I've never gathered it to sell, but I have gathered it to decorate my home with. I love moss. I've always loved moss since I was a little girl, and I would line my playhouse at Granny and Pap's with moss so that it was like I had a carpet. Granny and Pap's house didn't have carpet in it, and when I was young and somewhat silly, when you go through those things, I was kind of embarrassed that Granny and Pap didn't have carpet because that was all the rage and all the style. Now today, people don't necessarily want carpet because they find it's easier to keep bare floors clean, like what Granny and Pap had. Anyway, but I've gathered moss before and made Christmas decorations with it, kind of like a little snow globe. I put the moss in the inside and then put little figures or anything, or little branches are in there. And a mason jar makes the best, easiest. It's so easy. You go out and get your little moss and put it in the lid of the mason jar, and then put the mason jar on there, put your little decorations, and then there you have like a snow globe. And you can, if you don't use any kind of paint or anything in it, some people paint. Granny used to make those sometimes, and she would actually paint on the jar. But if you don't do that, then you can just unscrew it and undo it all and still use your mason jar for canning or for whatever you need to. John Paris, he noted that that was such a common thing for people to go out and gather greenery for Christmas that he wrote this little piece, December in the Hills, and this is just one little quote from it. But December is laughter and full hearts and the glad hub of company coming. It's mountain women gathering pine cones and galax and holly and weaving them into many splendored things to garland Christmas mantles. So that was something that he wrote about it. It was just one little piece of it. But speaking of pine cones, that's another thing you can decorate with, pine cones. Pap told me a great story about it. He said when he was growing up over in Pine Log, that's like across the mountain from where I live, it's like another community, kind of next to Brasstown, I guess you would say. Anyway, there was a gentleman that had a tree, and it wasn't a native tree at all to Appalachia. It was somehow, I don't know if he had planted it or maybe someone before him planted it. They got it from somewhere else, and I don't know what kind of pine it was, but it was the kind that has the great old big pine cones, the really big ones. But everyone knew the man had it, and he loved to share those pine cones with people. And again, at Christmas, people was when people would want them to decorate with. So one Sunday at church, he announced the pine cones, are ready, and anybody that wants them can come by and pick up a few, but please don't be greedy. Please leave enough for the whole community to have. So Pap said about a couple of days went by, and he decided he'd go down there, he'd walk to the man's house, and he'd get one or two for his grandmother and his mother so they could decorate for Christmas. Well, Pap said he got there and they were gone. There was not one pine cone left. And he thought, well, I guess somebody was greedy, but what are you going to do about it? So he just went on his way. But he said as the days continued to pass that week, another day or two, they began to hear other rumblings in the community. Can you believe that somebody stole all the pine cones? One person went down there and got them all, and they were all kind of upset about it. But come Sunday, the next Sunday at church, they all got the best surprise of all. So there was a girl about Pap's age, which I've known her my whole life, or she's known me my whole life. She's passed away. She passed away in this last year, but her name was Lenore. And Lenore, just wanting to be, Pap said she was always just a girl that was always happy to help and happy to be wherever she was at, and friendly and outgoing. And that's my experience with her as a child and as an adult. Anyway, but that she had decided that she would help everybody. So she took her own wagon down or her parents' wagon down to the man's tree, and she'd gathered every pine cone. Not that she was going to keep them for herself, but on Sunday she brought them all to church. So there was the wagon full of pine cones so that everyone could share, and that they wouldn't have to go to the man's house and plant them and pick them up. That's just the sweetest story. It makes it sweet to me. About makes me cry just because I knew her. But that's like the spirit of Christmas. Anyway, sorry about that. So that's a great thing when I think about decorating my own house and going out and picking holly that's got the red berries, or snipping, even if you just snip the edges, if you have a live tree, if you just snip the bottom branches off and you get to use those, that's great. But that's one of the traditions too in Appalachia. It's still gathering those greeneries for Christmas to decorate with. Another one is a funny one is loud noises. So a lot of times on Christmas Eve especially, sometimes on Christmas night, but mostly on Christmas Eve, you'll hear gunshots or firecrackers. Well, I live in a place where there's a lot of guns, a lot of people that are gun owners and that enjoy guns and enjoy practicing shooting and all that. So I grew up with that kind of thing and never thought anything about other people doing it, but turns out that's another thing that's common throughout Appalachia. So in my dictionary of Smoky Mountain English, they note it and they talk about it, but they're not just talking about the firearms or firecrackers. When I wrote about it before on the Blind Pig and the Acorn, a lot of older people noted that in their area of Appalachia that firecrackers didn't just go on sale like in July. They also went on sale in the months preceding Christmas so that people could buy them and have them to shoot off on Christmas Eve. Now this is a different kind of making noise, but it was people would go around singing and like with pots and pans and beating on them. So it's called a serenade. And people did this during weddings, but also at Christmas. So here's what the Dictionary of Smoky Mountain English had to say about it. A serenade is a noun. Serenading, if you're serenading, that's the verbal noun. Anyway, a similar celebration moving from house to house in the community on Christmas Eve or other holiday. So in the Hall collection, 1939, in Cades Cove, Tennessee, serenading, men would go from one house to another making lots of noise, ringing cowbells and shooting guns. That was Cora Myers. In 1960, Mason Memoir, on Christmas Eve night, it was customary for a group of young men to gather up and go serenading. We would take along the old cowbells, muzzle-loading shotguns, horns, and any other noise-making device which was available. There were always 3 or 4 banjos and fiddles in the crowd. We would try to slip up to someone's house without being discovered. The serenade would usually begin with a long blast from a trumpet. The trumpets were usually made from ram horns. Then the firing of the shotguns combined with the ringing cowbells added to the commotion. If a family were somehow missed by the serenaders, they felt as if they'd been slighted. It is still common for people to do that in certain areas of Appalachia. So I know in my own area of Appalachia, I've never been on a serenade. The closest thing to it would be when I was young at church, the youth choir or whatever you want to call it. It was adults too, but we'd go around and we would go to people's house, go Christmas caroling, but nobody was shooting off any guns or ringing cowbells. But when I wrote about this on the Blind Pig and the Acorn a few years back, I did find out there is a group of people in Brasstown that do that do go around. They've never come to my house, but I guess you'd have to be careful these days whose house you go to start shooting off guns or clattering cowbells or whatever. But there are still people that do it, and I've always wanted to. I always thought that would be the coolest thing. Again, you'd have to really be careful whose house you went to today. You're liable to scare them to death because that's kind of fallen out of fashion and not many people do it. But there's some other Christmas folklore that I want to share with you today. And it come from a book, Dory, Woman of the Mountains. That's like my favorite book about Appalachia. It was written by Florence Cope Bush. If you ever get a chance, please get it and read it. So she says, many legends, superstitions came to the mountains with our ancestors. One legend says that on Christmas Eve, the animals talk. Bees in their hives are said to hum the melody of an ancient carol from dusk to dawn. The old people say they have heard the music of the bees and have seen cows kneel and speak. On this holy night, the plants will bloom as they did when Christ was born. Although covered with snow, underneath the ground is covered with soft green vegetation. You can hear an angel sing if you're willing to pay the price. If you sit under a pine tree on Christmas Eve, angel voices will sing all around you. The price you pay for the miracle is death. You won't live to see the sunrise again. It's not funny, but it is funny that so much Appalachian folklore is death. Everything is death. So I don't think anybody'd be wanting to hear the angels sing, even though that'd be great. But wear something fresh and new on Christmas and your luck will be good. Don't wash clothes on the Friday before Christmas if you want to stay out of trouble. Don't let the fire go out on Christmas morning or spirits will come and take you away. Don't give your friends or neighbors a match, a warm coal, or even a light to be taken out of the house. If you do, you'll be giving away your hope of a good future. If you leave a piece of bread on the table after Christmas supper, you'll have enough to eat till next Christmas. That one's good. So she mentioned Old Christmas. Old Christmas is not something I grew up observing or even knew about until I started the Blind Pig and the Acorn. And then I began to hear people say, well, on Old Christmas, my family does this or something like that. And I thought, well, what is Old Christmas? So I had to find out. So I did a lot of research. This actually is not where I researched to begin with, but this is from this Dictionary Smoky Mountain English. So in 1895, Edson and Fairchild, Tennessee Mountains, January 6th. So see, I think she said January 5th. That's what she said, so I don't know about that. But the day is remembered by those who never heard of Twelfth Night or Epiphany. 1905, Miles, Spirit of Mountains. But he and Arth do not disagree about certain weather signs their mother taught them when they were shirt-tail boys, signs about Groundhog Day, for example, and the ruling days, the 12 days from the 25th of December to Old Christmas, each of which rules the weather of a month of the coming year. 1940, Newport, Plain Citizen. Don't carry ashes out between Christmas and Old Christmas. In recent times, as Old Christmas became only a historical curiosity, it is sometimes supposed to have been an observance of Epiphany, but this is quite erroneous. 1942, Thomas Blueridge. There are people who may never have heard of the Georgian or Julian calendar, yet in keeping Old Christmas as they do on January 6th, they cling unwittingly to the Julian calendar of 46 BC, introduced in this country in the earliest years. To them, December 25th is New Christmas, according to the Georgian calendar adopted in 1752. They celebrate the two occasions in a very different way, the old with prayer and carol singing, the new with gaiety and feasting. So that's interesting. Anyway, you can do more research about Old Christmas, but there is still people you'll hear, maybe they have like friends over or they do something simple like that. So there are a few people that still observe it. And again, it's because it's one of those traditions that was passed down in their family. They grew up with it being observed when they were a child, so then they've carried it on to till today and are observing it with their family and their children. So that's an interesting one. Frank C. Brown Collection of Folklore from North Carolina. That's a great book, and I don't have any of them, but the good thing about them is there's a whole series of them, Frank C. Brown's collection of North Carolina folklore. So he's got some about ballads, some about general folklore, some about like games and things like that. There's like a whole set of them. And you can find a lot of them, most all of them, online at different libraries that allow you to actually read them online. So you're not checking it out, or you're not having to pay or rent or anything like that. It's just free. I guess because the books are so old is probably why. But I looked in one of those to see if I could find any other folklore about Christmas, just because I'm crazy about folklore in Appalachia. So nothing made of leather during Christmas will be durable. It's unlucky to carry anything away from the house on Christmas morning unless something is brought in first. If it snows on Christmas Day, the grass will be green on Easter. A warm Christmas means a cold Easter. If a rooster crows repeatedly at midnight, he is crowing for Christmas. Horses talk on Old Christmas. That one reminds me, it's funny when the girls, Corey, when the first time I guess, I don't know what it was on TV, maybe America's Funniest Home Videos or something like that, and it was like a horse making a funny face, and then there was a human voice. But it was funny, she said, "Oh, Mama, I didn't know horses could talk too." So it was funny. I hated it. She was so excited that I hated to say, well, they really can't, honey. That's just, it's just TV. But water turns to blood at midnight on Old Christmas. And then I discovered there's many different variations about the one about the animals kneeling, like in the piece I read from Dory at midnight. Such as on Old Christmas, animals kneel down and face the east. On Christmas Eve at midnight, cows kneel and low. At midnight on Old Christmas, all horses and cows stand up and then lie down on their other side. So those are just some folklore that I found, not that I've ever heard anyone actually say any of those in my life in Appalachia. So you can see how quickly things, especially folklore, how quickly it fades away. There's a great story about animals kneeling on my site. If you go to Blind Pig and the Acorn, I'll try to link to it below, but it's Celia Miles wrote it, and it's a true story that happened to her when she was young, and it's just a really heartwarming Christmas story. If you're interested in reading it, I'll leave that link. But I hope you enjoyed this talk about traditions of Christmas in Appalachia, and I hope you'll leave a comment and tell me about ones that you know about that I didn't mention, or maybe tell me if you're familiar with the ones I did mention, or if your family gathers Greenery, or if what special food they cook for Christmas that makes you think of the holidays, or any other kind of traditions you have. I just thought of one other one that we do, and I didn't grow up doing this, but it was something I started with the girls. Is that on Christmas morning we usually, because we're going to have Christmas dinner with Granny, used to be with Granny and Pat, but now with Granny and the rest of the family. So there's really no reason to cook a big breakfast, because by 1 o'clock we're going to be eating, turkey and deer roast and all that kind of stuff. So we usually have muffins of some kind. I'll make blueberry muffins or something like that. And we put a candle in them, and then we sing Happy Birthday to Jesus. So that's just a little thing that I don't even remember how I started doing it, but we've done it ever since Corey and Katie was big enough to understand, I guess as a way for me to make sure that they understood what the reason for the season really was, instead of just the presents they'd just opened. But please leave a comment and share your Christmas traditions that you do with your family, and especially any that you know that come from Appalachia, the ones you've heard about or that you've experienced yourself. And please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. It's a great way to help me celebrate Appalachia, and I really appreciate it. But mostly I just hope you'll drop back by often as I celebrate Appalachia.